personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. So today I have a special guest on the show, Katrina Destre, who is the Director of Privacy for Kuma LLC. I had the pleasure of meeting Katrina. We ended up and I don't know, you may have to explain it better than me. So we ended up collaborating together. I think we were on a panel and I can't remember the name of the thing. I know
Smart Cities.
Smart, right. It was a Smart Cities panel. And this is funny. So a lot of the people that were in this conference, obviously smart city people, cybersecurity people. And as usual, we're kind of like the little wedge in the privacy folks. So we were on a panel together and it was a lot of fun actually prepping for that panel and getting to know Katrina. And you have such a fascinating background, as someone who's lived overseas in Europe and, working for international companies doing privacy, and it's sort of your background and telecom and how that connects to sustainability. I mean, it's just fascinating. So tell me anything that I left out about you that you would like people to know, and then let me know sort of kind of your thoughts about your trajectory into privacy.
Sure. Well, first of all, Debbie, thank you so much for inviting me to join you on this podcast. I'm a big fan, as you know. I actually have called you the scout. You're out there and you just scout and find the topics and the people that are doing interesting things in privacy. And I think it's because you are inherently curious, which is so important, to remain curious, keep learning. And that just enhances the field for everyone and the ways to go forward in learning about privacy. So my background, I'm a director at privacy at Kuma, a boutique consulting firm in privacy and security. And we offer a wide range of services to public sector organizations and private sector firms. And my focus is on the private sector. And currently I work in the financial services sector. But historically, my background has been in the telecom sector. And the reason for that is actually interesting. So after college, I thought I would work in the area of art law. It's a little different. And that's because I've had a lifelong fascination with dance and with art. And so I started working with an art publishing firm. And then I got this unique opportunity to work in a privatization project in post-communist Poland. So this was the early 90s, and it was a publishing opportunity. So it was to bring two formerly state-owned publishing plants to be privately managed. And this was a big investment in connection with the US government. So it was a high-profile project and very interesting. At the same time, it was a bit of a shock for me personally, because I moved from downtown San Francisco to downtown Warsaw in the early 90s. And I think the key word that comes from that is making do, living without modern infrastructure at that time. I mean, everything has changed naturally now, but at that time, it was transformational for me to experience that. And I was struck by the role of communications in our lives and how modern infrastructure was so critical. So having that experience made me absolutely hungry to understand international frameworks, legal and regulatory guidelines for rolling out modern infrastructure. And at the same time, the World Wide Web was coming alive. So I'm dating myself, but I mean, that was monumental. So I went back to graduate school and focused on legal and regulatory frameworks related to telecoms, which then, because I studied international law and policy, I I went to Brussels. I was recruited for a business planning position for a major company in Brussels. And the idea was to roll out telecom networks, get people connected. And this was very exciting. So I worked in the area of regulatory affairs for a number of years. And actually, I stayed in Belgium for nearly 2 decades and traveled everywhere. And it was just fascinating. Well, from regulatory affairs and telecoms, I then began to work in the area of sustainability, again, for the telecom sector. And oftentimes that's referred to as the ICT sector. So this information communications and technology sector. And sustainability really struck a chord with me because it was like bigger than myself. It was like, how are we going to make the world a better place? And it encompassed every area of organizations, various operations, from the beginning of responsible sourcing for different elements of their products or services to how they were communicating about their carbon footprint. It was everything. And so I found sustainability to be really exciting. It was taking shape at this time, and it was actually a legal requirement for some European-based firms to report on sustainability. So sustainability, climate change were really big topics in Europe, particularly at this time. And how I came to data privacy is that when working in sustainability, one of the key things that we did, and I say we because I worked both for an organization called GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, and one of the member companies after I worked with GESI. But I stayed active with GESI because I was on the board for the communications efforts, because a lot of the work at GESI is directed and led by the members. So it's a very member-led organization. And so one of the areas that we focused in on was looking at materiality and how different areas of companies would impact their operational success, as well as what stakeholders were expecting from these companies. So when we look at stakeholders, there's a wide range to consider. And that is, you've got obviously your customers, but you've also got your suppliers, you've got your vendors, you've got investors, you've got regulators, and you've got civil society. And civil society is really important to consider. And what I mean is like the NGOs. And so when looking at these top areas of sustainability, when reporting in, for example, a materiality report, a number of issues come up, and that can be from your product development, that can be ethics and compliance regarding your people, supply chain, your management, etc. But the number one issue from this sector became data protection and privacy. So we look at all those issues, and they can range between like 30 and 50 issues, depending on how you group them. And companies would look at these issues would change over time. So for example, if a company is looking at how they're energy efficient in 1 year in their products, that might be the top issue. But then as they mature with that issue, it can change to not be as critical because they're succeeding in that area, or perhaps their external stakeholders are satisfied, or they feel like the companies are on track. So that's not as much of a burning issue as it may be in one particular year. But what I saw is that this issue of data protection and privacy really rose to the top of the list. And when I say for the sector, I mean for all of the companies that were active in this effort in the ICT sector, information communication technology. And that struck me because I thought, this is really at the moment when all the companies are looking at these various issues and pointing to data protection and privacy as a key area that they need to respond to their stakeholders. What are we doing about this particular topic? And to be precise, this was happening in the year 2014. So data protection and privacy had been there as an issue, but it really rose from 2010 to 2014.
Right. And I like to, in my mind, I like to separate, not really separate. I kind of put privacy or people who are interested in privacy in sort of two different buckets, right? And so there, to me, it's the pre-GDPR bucket and the post-GDPR bucket. So you're definitely in that first bucket, right? The pre-GDPR bucket. And I think what GDPR did is that it made privacy a global concern, where it was always a big concern in Europe because of, we know that privacy was a fundamental human right in the Constitution, right? And in Europe from the 50s, and over the years in Europe, they had codified a lot of their laws to respect the privacy of people. So it doesn't surprise me when you say that you were doing this telecom work and that privacy issues sort of rose to the top, because they've done a good job over the years to try to do that. And then of course, with the data directive that preceded the GDPR, making sure that those principles are in their laws and the companies are following that. I think that's kind of a theme. But I think a lot of people who had not had that experience didn't really know that, because we weren't having those experiences in the US, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the when you were thinking about when you were in Europe and you were kind of seeing the way that they sort of thought about privacy differently, what were your thoughts? I mean, in terms of kind of a juxtaposition of what you were seeing in the U.S. at that time, because as you said, in the mid 90s, that's when sort of the internet woke up for individuals and businesses, right? And so I've been really interested, and that was kind of the time that I got really interested in technology, and I sort of watched it grow over the years to kind of this massive thing that it is now, and how people are more connected than they were in the past. And then also back then we didn't have as much data, so there wasn't as much data collection. There were no iPhones. People really weren't having, cell phones are quite primitive at that
Right.
time. And telecom, I remember in the mid 90s, I was in the mid 90s in the US, they were busting up the big telephone
Right.
companies only
Right.
to join them back together like 20 years later. But yeah. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so there really is a distinction. I mean, I've lived, half my life in Europe and then coming back. And we have a phrase in Europe, private life. You don't really hear it here in the US, your private life. So the word privacy makes me think of private life. And it was really a natural way of speaking and operating in business. You have your business life, you have your private life. And so there is an inherent view that your personal data is your private information. That's your right. That's your property, if you will. So that's long part of the views of European citizens and the
Yeah,
way of
and
living as well.
that's true. I never really thought about it that way. And then also one distinction I would like to make, and I'm sure that you know and understand this and have seen this, a lot of times when we're talking about privacy and we're trying to compare and contrast between the US and sort of Europe, you know, we have to understand that in Europe, privacy is a fundamental human right. So
Yes.
they don't have to fight to have privacy because they have it as a right, right? So the GDPR, we call it a privacy law, but it really is a data protection law, right? Because it's protecting the privacy of the person. Where here in the US, we have to fight for privacy and protection, right? Because we're trying to get laws to give us privacy for certain things that we don't have right now.
Right. When the CCPA, was based in California, first came out, and it was being compared to the GDPR, and people were saying, "Oh, it's a new GDPR for California." I thought, not exactly. I mean, if you really read into it, and I had to come away with a quick way to summarize it for my non-privacy friends. What's the difference? And I said, in the GDPR, it's like there has to be a reason to have your data and to process it. Whereas here in the US and with regard to the CCPAs, assume they already have it. They just now need to be able to sell it or to share it. So that was a way of making it easy for my non-privacy friends to see the difference between the two. Yeah. We assume here in the US that they do have your personal data. Whereas in Europe, you're assuming that, it's your personal data. It's your private data.
Right. Like they didn't ask for it or you didn't give them permission to have it, where here it's kind of scooped up and we don't know kind of what's happening. And then, something crazy.
Catch it before it goes out.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know about you, but first of all, when the laws come out, I try not to read anyone's opinion about it. So I go and literally read the whole thing myself, because I know that I probably have a different point of view or insight or something. But the one thing that I always do when I look at these laws, I always look at the exemptions. So who gets carved out, who can't, oh yeah, we're going to pass this law except for this, and this. So to me, it's been really interesting to see, and I tell my European friends about the CCPA, when people are trying to compare the two, I'm like, GDPR has very few carve outs, right? So they're not exempting a lot of people, and it covers almost any industry, where the US, there's like a lot of exceptions. So, if you're a not-for-profit, you're carved out. If you're law enforcement, you're carved out. If you're Department of Motor Vehicles, you're carved out of CCPA. So, I mean, to me, that says a lot. I always look for the carve outs, who's exempted from certain laws. What are your thoughts?
That's an excellent strategy. I love it.
Yeah, because we make a lot of assumptions, right? Or people do make a lot of assumptions about, what is covered and what isn't. What would be, when we talk about data privacy, and we, in a business sense, right? When you're talking to businesses and trying to advise them on privacy, what do you feel like are the biggest hurdles that you run into, maybe the thing that people misunderstand the most or about privacy initially?
Initially, we have to have reasons to process the data. That I wouldn't say it necessarily is a hurdle. I would say it's an ongoing everyday reminder. We have to have reasons. And I think that we have evolved in understanding that this is personal data, that this is to be protected, that it's no longer collect everything you can because one day you might need it. That we've evolved, definitely. Right. But where we can still go is to get it into our DNA, get it so that it's so deeply ingrained that it's really business as usual, that we assume that to see certain information, it has to be role-based access. That when we have information, it's only for a specific purpose, for perhaps a specific time. And that this is so ingrained that to see it otherwise would seem odd.
Yeah.
That's the hurdle that we need to overcome, so that when we see something very simple like an email address, if we see the entire email address, it should strike us as odd. Why are we seeing the entire email address? So we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But that's maybe an example of a hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I think what it is right now, we're almost like swimming upstream in a way, because the way businesses collected data in the past is completely opposite. It's collect everything. We have this new technology, keep it in the back room. Let's not delete anything. We don't know we'll need it. Again, one of my dear friends made a really interesting analogy. It's like this huge junkyard, and someone thinks that there's a diamond ring somewhere in it. So we can't get rid of anything in the junkyard because we think maybe we'll find something
It's there
valuable
somewhere, right? But the problem is the
Yeah,
wrong person might get that diamond ring.
yeah, totally. The wrong person may get the diamond ring, and then two, you know, data retention. There weren't regulations around disposal of the data, or like you said, the regulations, especially in Europe for sure. And now we're seeing with these state laws in the US, they're addressing the fact that you should really tie your data to a purpose. And once that purpose is done, then you don't really have a reason, right? A good reason
Right.
to be able to keep that data. And so that has not been the case in the past. And so I think a lot of the data breaches that we're seeing today, whenever I see a data breach headline, I always kind of follow the story, and I always want to know, how does the breach happen, or what
Right.
data did they breach or whatever. And a lot of times it is not kind of the high value, or what they consider within the business, kind of their high value, high velocity data. It's something old on a server somewhere that no one was really paying attention to. Maybe it was a system that wasn't decommissioned, or cyber criminals, they can get in, they find the weakest link and they try to get in to that. So I think having stockpiling data in that way is a liability, is not an asset. So having companies think about data that you cannot tie to a purpose, and you don't really need it right now, to really think of it as a liability and really treat it that way, and not just sort of just stockpile it in the back room somewhere.
Right. I mean, we should really start using the term stale data more often. And when it's stale, it's really taking up unnecessary space and becoming a liability. And, that's also a connection back with sustainability as well, because to store that data takes up space. I mean, in terms of the servers that are used, and takes up energy. So right. They're very complementary, store less data, use less energy, and reduce your exposure to potential bad actors.
Yeah. Do you feel like I don't know, in some ways I feel like we're having sometimes the wrong conversation with people about data. So in a way, I feel like the conversation, maybe this is in the media, is like, okay, we want to collect all this data, right? So there are all this data everywhere, and then we're going to go through extraordinary measures to protect it, which that's not bad, right? But I feel like the conversation we should be having is, let's not collect so much data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's across the board. It's companies collecting the data, but it's also in your personal life. When you enter a building and they ask you for your ID, do you really need to hand over your driver's license that contains a lot of personal information versus, like, for example, a US passport card, which is just your name and your image? And it's like, where is that going? Do you really need to make a photocopy for my 20-minute visit today, et cetera? So it's across the board that we get into our minds. Why are we processing this data? What is the reason? And is that justified? And also the data retention. That's a big one. Where does it go?
Yeah. I'm
trying to teach my kids this at the same time too.
Yeah.
Like, don't just hand over everything, use your student ID. Don't
even get me started with IDs. So, most of these IDs, that are issued by states or governments, a lot of them now have barcodes on them. And sometimes you go places and they scan the barcode and people assume, oh, it's just, the data that they get from this barcode is what's on the front of this card, and that is not true. There's like a lot more stuff there that you can't see and you wouldn't possibly even know about that may be collected about you. So I think, to me, I don't like when, you know, someone wants to scan my barcode of my driver's license, because I'm like, why do you need that? You know what I mean?
Exactly. We need to get it into our mindset. So this is, again, part of the DNA, so that we get it so deeply ingrained that it feels wrong if it's handled otherwise. You know, I was thinking about the connection between sustainability and data privacy, and I thought of this analogy. If we are more conscious about green behavior now, sustainability for a long time has been linked to green, you know, and if we were to see someone now throw an electronic device unused into a bin, we'd be in shock. We'd think, wait, it doesn't go there. You have to put it in a bin for recycling e-waste, right? And I think that we should aim to have the same type of shock reaction in treating our data responsibly. If
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, because now we would feel that way. If we were to see that kind of example, we'd think, wait, what happened? Why is the person doing that? You know, that's definitely not the way that we want to handle our discarded objects. You know, it has to go in the proper bin, which is an evolution. We didn't think that way, you know, decades ago. No. But now we need to think about the same way with regard to personal data. Do we need to see things unmasked? Does everyone need to have access? Do we really need to retain? Do we know our retention schedules? And when access is supposed to be revoked, how do we know? You know, it's asking those secondary questions on controls. And they become so well known, not just by privacy teams and not just within the compliance department, but for everyone. It's so deeply ingrained in the DNA across all organizations, just like now behaving in a green, sustainable way is not limited to one department. It's for everyone.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit. So you're such a kind person and you have such a calming way and manner about you. So it does not surprise me that you're in privacy, right? Because you have to talk with people at all levels of organization and be able to sort of build relationships and bridges. And traditionally, you know, a lot of companies, things have been very siloed. So you're probably talking to groups that maybe never talk to one another ever. And you're talking with people, you know, again, at all levels of conversation. Tell me how you sort of approach, you know, getting buy-in, or not necessarily getting buy-in, because I think from a privacy perspective, there has to be buy-in at kind of the top to be able to do this, but actually building those relationships within organizations where things tend to be, especially in corporate situations, very siloed.
That is such a great question, because that's how we move forward, right? We need everybody in the companies and the organizations. And so we need to establish that connective tissue with everyone. What I found works is to try to understand their heartbeat. So understand that different organizations, different departments within organizations have a different heartbeat. Like, for example, operations, their heartbeat is pretty fast. They're putting out fires, you know, and to understand when you're talking to someone that's working in an operations role, I mean, they're putting out this fire, this fire, this fire. There really is a different energy level and a different attention span in operations. And it has to be that way. And there's also, quote, no forgiveness in operations. I started my career in operations, so I understand that heartbeat and that rhythm, and they want communication fast and quick. And so to position your question in a way that they can respond quickly and they get immediately why you're asking and why this deserves to be at the front of their fire list to respond to. Now, if you go to someone who's in regulatory affairs, and I've worked in regulatory affairs, that's more reflective. It's a different heartbeat. It's like they're reading policy positions and they're reading laws and they're reading, you know, different frameworks, and they're understanding, what difference does this make to our CEO? What difference does this make to us? So that's not a putting out fires heartbeat in the same way that operations is. That's a reflective positioning. So when communicating with someone from a department like regulatory affairs, it's better to position it like that. That's how this fits into their work. I think in all communications, the key is to think about your audience, your reader, make it easy. A lot of times people have said, surveys, if you think about surveys, they reflect the person who's posing the questions more so than what information they're trying to seek from the people that are responding. If we look at surveys that way, well, it's very similar in working with across different departments and disseminating that message of privacy and why they should get on board, et cetera, rather than be concerned with your positioning of questions, think about how they are receiving it. Is it a fire to be put out?
Yeah.
Is it a policy change? When it comes time to communications externally for media coverage, that's helpful to think about as well, because media really focuses on a conflict, a new product development, or policy change. If it's not one of those three, it's probably not going to get the attention that is perhaps desired. So that's understanding where that department is classifying their information. So just kind of recap, reaching out to operations, think about it, they're putting out fires all the time. So how do we make sure that this is a fire position in front of their other fires, so to speak? If it's regulatory affairs, if it's more reflective, it's more deep analysis, how do you fit that into their ongoing analysis? And if it's to disseminate information to your communications team, how does it fit within their usual priority listing of information to disseminate?
Yeah, oh my God, that's a master class in being an executive and a privacy professional. That's great advice. I would love to talk to you about, so I liked the way you described kind of, those different teams and like the policy folks being more reactive or reflective. I feel like privacy, well, okay, so let's say before privacy and cybersecurity or cyber breaches, anything became a thing, right? The way, and a lot of companies are still like this, and this to me contributes to privacy issues or contribute to privacy attacks. It's like, let's clip along, everything's working, let's not worry about privacy or cybersecurity until we have an incident, and then let's react to it. And so the way privacy is, and the way that it has to be so foundational to an organization, you really can't do it successfully if you're in a reactive stance. It requires a level of kind of strategy and proactivity that a lot of companies or organizations don't think of it that way. And so I'm kind of tying in cybersecurity in here too, because, I get frustrated when I see all these cyber attacks and people say, oh, we're going to react to it. Or, like the US government now, I think they're creating like a task force to, react to cyber attacks. And I'm like, we have to prevent cyber attacks, or we have to find ways to minimize them or minimize the damage, or share information. So it can't be just firefighting, right? Because that is not helpful. That's very hurtful to the organization. So from your point of view, how do we move organizations from thinking about things like privacy and cyber in a reactive way and thinking about it more in a proactive way?
So a lot of organizations now are launching their wellness programs for employees, right? We want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. This is helping us. This is helping you be a better you. I think that the way to respond to this question is think about privacy in terms of being well in privacy. It's like, don't wait till you're ill to go to the doctor. take care of yourself in the ways that make sense for you. And the same philosophy would apply with data protection and privacy and cybersecurity, wellness. To be strong, take care of your foundations, and don't wait until one of these incidents happen to then seek advice.
Wow, that's mind blowing. I never thought about that. That makes so much sense.
So the privacy wellness, we can launch the privacy wellness initiative.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because we want organizations to be well, right? To succeed and not trip over, what they're doing. And then I think another thing that happens is, let's say your company, just as an example, let's say your company bakes cakes. Okay, you're a bakery, right? A lot of people think, being about the business is about focusing on cake baking, which is not bad, right? Obviously, that's kind of your core business. But I think what's happened with the advent of the internet and the connectedness and how data goes, some of these businesses now, what they're not realizing, the shift that's happened is that, before, a long time ago, many years ago, technology was a nice to have. And now it's so entrenched in business. A lot of people cannot do business without, technology, or let's say companies may have barriers to adoption, like they want to sell their product. I have to use this example. A US company wants to sell their product in Sweden and they don't know about GDPR. So I think there's been a shift that people haven't really noticed, which is technology is enabling them to do their jobs. And and without it, because it's so entrenched in what people do, some people cannot do their work without that, or can't run their business without the technology. And then understanding that there could be barriers to adoption or barriers to growth if you don't understand privacy. I think those things have to be more apparent.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So if it were the world according to Katrina, what would be your wish for privacy, or anywhere in the world, related to technology, law, regulation, anything, humans? What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's just such a lovely question. It's like a wish list. You close your eyes and say, hey, this is what I wish. Perhaps you blow some candles and it comes true. So what I would really wish for is for the two worlds to really combine even closer. That data privacy is viewed as, I was describing earlier, business as usual, so deep within our DNA that this is the way that we operate. And that this handling personal data in a responsible way will sustain companies and organizations. So when I think about this word sustainability, we look at the key word, sustain. Some people think of sustainability and think, oh, it's a green initiative. And I back up, it started off in that arena, but it's far more rich than that, to be limited to climate change endeavors, which of course are very, very important. But sustainability, the root word is sustain. What will enable us to keep going? And data privacy is a key part of that. If we don't protect our data and really value privacy, then it will become an impediment for companies to continue to go forward, to continue to go on, and it will inhibit their ability to be sustainable organizations. That is what I would really hope, that we do combine the two worlds even closer. They are combined now, in that people that are working in sustainability absolutely look at data protection and privacy as a material issue for their ongoing business success and as a top area for their stakeholders. as I described, they're investors, they're customers, regulators, NGOs. That is really key. But I think that we can do an even better job by integrating it into our daily conversation. Why do we need this information? How are we protecting it? So that, as I gave that example, if you were to throw something into the bin, an e-waste device into a bin, it would be a shock.
Right.
It would really take you by surprise, and everyone in every department. And I think that in a great, close your eyes, make a wish, it would be my wish too, that in every department, people would recognize a personal data element and say, oh, hey, we got to treat this seriously. We got to protect it. It means something. It's a key part of our company's asset and a key element of us handling this data responsibly, and definitely part of our foundation of going forward and continuing to be a sustainable company or organization.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, this was so much fun. I'm so glad we were able to collaborate and do this. I really enjoy your work, and we always have great conversations.
We do, Debbie. I really, really love your podcast, and I take my walks and I listen to them, and you're so conversational, and you put your guests at ease, and you just have a great following. So I'm a fan.
Aw, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, we'll definitely be talking, as we always do, soon.
Yes, I look forward to continuing our collaboration.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.